I think the first thing to note is that I come from the center of Canada. I don't sort of stand to represent all of Canada, and the center is sort of a unique place. And I sort of think that a way to understand a place is through myths. And when I say myths, take no offense, but small Bible stories, sort of tales that exaggerate things in a certain way. So how do you talk about something in a way which is larger than what it is? And so how cold was it? It was minus 80. So this sort of sense of exaggeration. So I'm gonna start with that and show some Canadian architects that I sort of think somehow embody some of these myths. And some of these characters are mythical, I think, in their own right. And then I'll show some of my own work. Canada is a really sparsely populated place, especially in comparison to Sao Paulo and even Brazil. I mean, there's parts of Brazil that aren't so populated, but Canada is really a wilderness. And it's really remarkable. You can drive for a very long time and see no one, and see nothing. It's really a strange sort of thing. It's also a place not unlike Brazil, where there were people there before European descendants came, or descendants from wherever. So people always talk about Canada being discovered. Canada was always there, and it was inhabited. There were people there. There was original peoples, Aboriginal peoples, so the original peoples, and they're still there. Not unlike here, really. So I'm going to start by showing a short movie. It's maybe 15 minutes long. It's made by a friend of mine, and it's a film about the lake north of Winnipeg, this really expansive lake. And it's these three. It's fiction, so it's not real, of course, but it's three characters that are crossing the lake, and they really sort of talk about sort of how cold it is, and how lonely it is, and how destitute it is, and how sort of bleak it is. But it's quite a beautiful piece. So I'll show it. It's a film by Matt Home. It's called The Lost Bungford Expedition. And does that bleakness make for a different kind of urbanism and a different kind of architecture? It does, actually. So, and there's a whole bunch of practical sides to the sort of coldness. And lots of the practical sides are really that people just don't go out in the winter. People just stay inside. Buildings have jackets on them that are this thick, and there's energy codes for buildings where you actually have to prove the sort of insulative value of the building. There's all sorts of aspects of the cold, but the thing that's being discussed here is the psychology of the cold, and of some sort of craziness and almost a fear of death, and people die in Winnipeg, 5 a year probably from the cold, and you get frostbite on your face and stuff. I mean, it's cold. It's really cold, and it does completely change how people live in this city, how buildings get made, and it is a real thing. Okay, let's get this going here. So, view slideshow. Yeah.
How do the people die? I mean,
how do people die in Winnipeg? In Winnipeg, people die that maybe there's, like in Brazil, there's people that don't have homes. So there's homeless people, and not to categorize them to a particular group, but lots of Aboriginal people maybe aren't doing so well, Native American Indians, and lots of them live on the street. And when I say 5 die a year, it's probably more. If you can't really live on the street when it's minus 40, you just can't. I mean, you can get frostbite. We all get frostbite. As a kid, you stick your tongue to the school fence post and the skin comes off or whatever. There's all those kinds of things. But yeah, people actually die for sure. Okay, so I'm just talk a little bit about Aboriginal people, and then I'll show some architecture, and then I'll show some of my own architecture. So Canada, of course, there was people there before Europeans came, Aboriginal people, and we all think about American Indians as sort of one group, but really there was multiple groups. And Canada is a really diverse place. So there's places which are way more temperate in terms of climate than Winnipeg, for sure. So this is some early maps. There's also a ton of different groups and different tribes and different languages. So the thing I'm trying to convey is that Canada isn't and never was a homogenous place like Brazil. There's all sorts of different areas and different places within Canada. So this is a culture map that shows all of North America as not as territories, not as necessarily political territories, but as Aboriginal territories of different groups in different regions, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how to formulate, but
That's okay.
in that map.
Yeah. This one.
This one,
Yeah.
Are they Indians?
Indians. Yeah. You can call them Indians. It's not the best word, but that's okay.
This is an actual map.
This is an actual map of the landmass of North America, and these are the various groups that sort of defied political boundaries and still do to some degree. It's sort of a different way of sort of breaking up the continent.
But they always be there, or
They're always there. They're always there. Some of them move. Mostly they stayed where they were, and they continue to.
because it's strange to see that image and do the parallel with the cities,
Where population
I
is.
see the lakes there.
Yep.
I think it's the most popular.
This right here.
Canada, eh?
Yeah, this right here, and in America too, for sure.
It's
Yeah.
strange, to see
Yeah,
that, because
yeah.
the most productive cities and the more populated cities are in the space where there is no native.
There's not so many Aboriginal people. Yeah, that's a very interesting sort of commentary, that Aboriginal people were sort of quite evenly distributed across the whole continent. I mean, there weren't sort of densities. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'll just show you a couple pictures of sort of traditional Aboriginal sort of architecture that sort of was of the place. So this is from plains. That's bark and small willow trees that are sort of bent. And teepees that were sort of traveling homes where Aboriginal people would sort of follow herds and then set up home. And adaptable teepees where in the summer you can take the skin off. And sometimes canvas, sometimes animal skin, sometimes buffalo hide, following the buffalo largely, but being able to sort of cool their house. And at the same time withstand sort of storms and snow. And they would build grass up inside to sort of insulate the bottom halves of the teepees. And they'd be able to have fires inside. Sort of the first architecture really in Canada. And then this is in another location. This isn't on the plains where the tents would have been animal skin. Here the teepees are much smaller in scale, and they're bark. So they're bark that's sort of, and again somewhat portable, quite portable. So there's how a teepee would be transported with when horses arrived, and before that with dogs. Again, there's sort of the erection of a teepee. And they're quite beautiful structures. This is an image of an Inuit group. So this is very far north, and an Inuit couple sort of living off the land, and very interestingly, it's only been 40 years since Inuit people have ended up in settlements. So Inuit communities, Inuit people have memories of living off the land and hunting and being sort of in the Arctic. Aboriginal people populate the cities of Canada, and in particular where I'm from. The Aboriginal population's maybe 1/5, and some of them are doing well, and some of them aren't doing so well. This is me. It's a really crappy picture, and a guy that sort of lives on the street, who comes by every second day, and he's a good buddy of mine. I give him money sometimes, I give him empty beer bottles, and there's some sort of exchange. So there's a really large population of Aboriginal people in Canada. I think it's sort of a super important thing to know. And not to sort of generalize the population, but Aboriginal people tend to sort of poke fun at themselves, and they find humor. It's really super amazing, super nice. Very gentle. This is a sculpture that we did with an Aboriginal artist last year in a large museum in Winnipeg, the Museum of Human Rights. So this is this artist made these beads, and it's sort of a piece of fabric, and they're clay beads. There she is, Rebecca Belmore. Okay. Maybe Eduardo's shown you some of these kinds of drawings or maps or comparisons. There's a map of Winnipeg. And at this point, this is maybe 8 or 10 years ago. There's about 700,000 people. And here's a map of New York, of Manhattan. So there's Manhattan and Winnipeg. As a comparison, just to sort of get some sense of just how spread out it is. What the lack of density is. It's really very Spartan. It's remarkable, actually. So 5 million people in Toronto live in the same landmass as Winnipeg. So this is where people live in Canada, and you guys have probably looked at some of this stuff. Really, they just live in the south. There's this whole sort of region which is sort of free land in some ways, but it's also in your head. It's also the psychological sort of sense that there's this sort of openness and this sort of expansiveness. Oh, this is an interesting map that shows where there's permafrost all the time. So when you get to a certain point, so we are here, or I'm here in this province, this sort of place. And when you get to a certain point in the province, it's always frozen. The ground's always frozen. So when you take the train north, I used to work on the train and go to the port of Churchill, which is right here. And at a certain point, the train is just on this sponge because it's sort of half frozen, and it's really remarkable. Forests. Okay, and here's snow. So we don't get tons of snow in Winnipeg, but we get lots of snow in other places in Canada. This is an image from Winnipeg. This is my image of a snowstorm where you can't get out the door. You just it snows for a day and a half, and you're stuck inside. You have to sort of literally sort of push the door open and bang it open and crawl out. It's really quite severe. And rather than the cars driving down the roads, there's snow machines, and people are wearing snowshoes and wandering around, and the whole city closes for days, you know? It really happens. The other thing I would say about the central part of Canada that I think is an important thing is Winnipeg's this place that... Canada is this place that's very young. It's less than 150 years old. And at least in the center part of Canada, the immigrants that came there to settle were mostly from Eastern Europe, and they came from this renewed communism this communism which was just developing in Russia. So there's this real socialist sense in the middle of the continent of caring for others and of this sort of we over me kind of attitude. So there was a strike in Winnipeg in 1919, a really famous strike where the immigrants said we're not going to the recent people that had come there, we're not going to take it anymore, and they formed unions and so the nature of Canada, I think that's quite remarkable, is that is that they provide for people. So there's health care, there's money for the arts, and it sort of stems out of this sort of leftist kind of culture that existed in Winnipeg and continues to exist. So the first elected communist politician came from Winnipeg in 1920. The other thing that's sort of mythological about Canada, perhaps, is the sport of hockey. So people here are really into soccer. In Canada, people are really into hockey. And in this case, it's a national thing against Russia, let's say. So Russia's our biggest rival. So hockey becomes a really sort of part of our psychology and part of our psyche. The Jets had a team. They lost it to the NHL, and then they got it back, called the Winnipeg Jets. It's my favorite hockey team. The Edmonton Oilers are not from Winnipeg. Taylor Hall. The other sort of dominant sport, which is a really fascinating one, which I think one never gets mined for how it might manifest itself in architecture, is curling. And you probably don't know curling here, but and this is not the best rink, but there are rinks everywhere, and they're tubes. This one's not really a tube; it's more of a gable. It's not the most spectacular, but oftentimes there's just these tubes with fluorescent lights that go to the end, and sheets of ice, and the ice surface itself. They sprinkle water on it, so it gets these little pebbles. So what happens is they throw these rocks, these stone rocks, on the ice, and they sort of rise above the pebbles, and the ice continually changes. But the sound of the rocks on the pebbles and the sound of the rocks hitting each other is absolutely amazing. It's totally amazing. And the thing that's missing from this picture, I've got a couple more curling pictures. Oh, this is the really famous Winnipeg curler, Jennifer Jones, who wins the sort of world championship every year. But the thing that was missing from that picture and from this picture too is that there's always a bar, and people smoke and drink and curl, and it's this social thing. Now maybe the last mythic thing about the center of Canada is a bug, which is called a mosquito. And so after enduring minus 40 for 6 months and thinking that everything's okay and it's going to be warm, and it does get quite warm, these mosquitoes come out, these moustiques, and they bite the hell out of you, and they suck your blood, and you get marks all over you, and really you can't have window screens, or you need to have window screens. You can't have open windows like here. It's such a remarkable thing to have open windows here. Okay, I'll just show you a few other sort of mythic characters. I'll show you this Finn from Saskatchewan, really close to where I'm from, and then I'll show you a couple architects. This guy's name is Thomas Sukinen, and if you're driving in Saskatchewan in the middle of the prairie, it's actually not as flat as some places, but it's pretty flat. You see this ship, and this strange Finn built this ship. He came to Saskatchewan with his family in 1910, and after a while, he decided that he wanted to go home, and so he figured out a way to sort of sail that ship in 3 parts down the Saskatchewan River to the Hudson Bay, and using the tide assemble it, and then sail home. Of course, he never got home because he got put in a mental asylum. People thought he was mad, like completely mad. But the reason I think I show you this is because the harshness of the place, and it is quite harsh in order to live, breeds some kind of will over reason or persistence, that people actually have a much different kind of persistence to do things and to achieve things because it's so goddamn hard. It really is. There's Sukinen. There's the ship again. The pat cows. Patco's went to school in Manitoba. They're probably the most famous Canadian architects. You probably have heard of the Patco's, somewhat, yeah? So this is they did projects around central Canada for some time, and this is a project in BC. They've moved to BC since, but this is a school which I think is sort of really of the place in some ways. Not very many concrete buildings in Canada. Not even in the eastern cities. Most buildings are wood. I mean, larger commercial buildings, of course, are concrete and steel, but smaller buildings are almost all wood. So this is a school for an Aboriginal band, a native band, and the Aboriginal band actually participated in the construction of the school. So they actually built their own school. Okay. There's a snow machine that isn't a piece of architecture, but I think it's a really iconic vehicle that was sort of invented and populates the area around central Canada. And it's a machine for getting around, and it's also a machine for ice fishing. And so this is the machine here, and there's inside of it. So it's got its own heater. Some of them actually have wood stoves inside, and they're really fantastic machines. You can go absolutely anywhere. So that first little film, you see those guys pulling the cart across the Broad Lake. If they had a bombardier, they would have been fine. And these are trucks on the ice, but these are ice fishing shacks. So people actually on the lakes, they set up shacks and they fish in the winter. So you drag a little hut to wherever you want it to be. You auger a hole and you fish inside. You sort of fish from inside the room, right? It's really super spectacular, and there's a whole culture around it.
They built these huts, or are they there already there?
No, the huts. Well, this is the lake. So, or this is actually the river. This is Red River. So you drag the hut from your yard. You pull it. You tow it. You park it somewhere. You drill a hole in the ice and you fish. And you fish inside. And you have a little stove and you heat yourself and you fish.
How do you do that?
How do they do the hole? You can use a hand auger. I mean, the ice is maybe this thick. So you like a spiral, like a auger. But on those machines, they also have augers in the back of them. It's quite fascinating. They commercially ice fish. Métis people. Okay, Clifford Weens. Here's one more architect, and then we can move on to some of our own projects, or my own projects. This is a guy from Saskatchewan, Clifford Weens, and this is a small, remarkable little building he made that's a foundry and a candle making shop, made out of culverts and made out of ferroconcrete. So there's the building itself. So just making it with mesh and there's a tube that goes into the founder itself. There's a plan of it. There it is inside. Small little park structure that he did. One more architect, a Winnipeg architect, Jim Donahue, who taught architecture at the School of Manitoba in the mid-1940s until about 1960. And this is an image of Marcel Breuer, he studied under Marcel Breuer. So he ended up doing a lot of, it's Rietveld, of course, but Donahue did a whole bunch of really amazing original furniture. So this is a chair called the Winnipeg chair, which I showed you, that Rietveld chair of bended plywood. This is a chair which takes thin veneer and turns it three-dimensional. And this is in 1949. So strange little shape that just gets pulled together, and he makes it in his garage. So this idea of sort of a will over reason to make something quite remarkable. There's the underside of it. There you see it. So it's really a splayed sort of sheet with a cut and a hole, and through that, gluing layers together, you're able to make a three-dimensional shape, which George Nelson copied in about 1955, but the first one's a Winnipeg chair. There's the shape of it. And there's one in quite good shape in my house. There's another one. So Donahue made a sort of modern architecture that's sort of from Breuer and from Gropius, from Harvard, from the GSD, from the late 1940s or early 1940s in Winnipeg. And so there's one of his drawings for that coconut chair, the Winnipeg chair. Some other drawings for some of his other projects, like furniture projects that he made. Like a web chair made out of plywood. Very, very simple frame. You just see how simple it is, and it's really crude. Just cut pieces of plywood. And then he also made the first stackable plastic chair in the world in 1949 in a thermoform. And he designed our School of Architecture. Okay, subjective mapping. I'll just show a couple of student projects, and then we'll get into some architecture. It'll be more fun. Sorry, but so talking about subjective mapping is maybe a way to start to understand a way to work. This is a student's project, Rebecca Lowen, from a few years ago. This is in Winnipeg. This is a two-story 1910 building, and there's a shop on the main floor right here. And she spent the day at his shop, this guy's shop, this junk store, and started to sort of figure out how to make a map that could make an architecture. So in this sense, this is the drawing that came first, and this is sort of a drawing based on memory. It's not measured, about conversations that were had and experiences in the shop. So about things and about exchanges. So this becomes a different kind of map. Not this kind of measured quantitative map, but a qualitative map. And through this qualitative map comes a negative drawing. So it's a sort of reversal of that sort of subjective map. And also from the shop comes a series of photographs that again become collaged and montaged to then, through that and the map, to start to make, these are some early studies to make a sort of complex of buildings that somehow capture in some ways the sort of feeling and the spatial condition and the sort of attitude of those early drawings. This is another student Choi, who's very interested in the sort of social history of the city. When you go to the north end of the city, there's a sign that says "People Before Profit," and so the Occupy movement was happening at the time. This is a couple of years ago, and she started to map out the tents sort of encampments, and through mapping those tent encampments, started to create these blankets, these sort of portable maps that start to become three-dimensional and start to become layered and have two sides to them. And from that, the project evolved into this sort of community project, which was made by sort of individuals of the community, and sort of took its language and its sort of ideas from those initial maps. Okay, I'm not going to go through this fully, and we're going to get on to some of our own projects here. I'm not going to show you Perry's work either. I'll show you these drawings. You like these drawings? These are other kinds of mapping drawings. This is Perry Culper, who I've done a couple exhibitions with. This is sort of a fictive sort of drawing which generates itself. And there's another one of Perry's. And this is a drawing instrument by one of my colleagues, Nat Chard, who taught with us for a number of years. An instrument to cast shadows, to test the shadows of objects. Okay, let's get out of this. Let's move on to some projects where we can actually talk about some things. Okay. Okay, so now I can talk about my own work. So this is just an image of myself with a friend from about 25 years ago. And the reason I show this image is because art really means a lot to me, and really sort of informs a projects in terms of a way to work, and also just what it is. So yeah, it's just sort of an origin thing. I used to put out a magazine, and in the magazine we used to put out records. And so I always have an image of at least one of the records. Okay, this is the next maybe 4 or 5 images are images of sort of a belief system that I have about architecture. And I think it's about sort of the reception of architecture. That there's different ways we can understand architecture, that architecture can have meaning through symbols, through signs, through language. There's multiple ways. And for me, I think one of the most important ways is for you to be able to touch it. And this is a bit sort of excessive, the idea of touching somebody's breasts. This is a feminist piece by Valley Export, but the idea that we're all human beings and we're alive and we all taste and touch, and that architecture should be able to you should be able to taste it and touch it. This is an image of a cake that I make. I make this cake quite often. It's a chocolate cake, and it's made with very few ingredients. It's made with 1.5 pounds of chocolate and 1 pound of butter and 21 ounces of sugar and a cup of water and 10 eggs. And you can either have the most fantastic cake ever, or the cake can just be a complete throwaway. And the fact that it's made with very few ingredients, and you really have to know those ingredients, I think is a really remarkable thing. So I always sort of think about it in relation to making buildings. That the materials don't have to be exotic or precious to make it a really good building, but you have to know them. And you have to know how to sort of put them together in some way. This is an image by Italian artist from the 1960s, Giuseppe Pannoni. And it's a project called I Feel the Brook Under My Breath. And so he's under here sort of feeling the brook. I think architecture should be felt. One should actually be able to feel it. This is a page from a book of the Spanish philosopher who's now dead, Ignacio Sola Morales. And this is a chapter from Differences, and the chapter is called Weak Architecture. And I think weak architecture is a very interesting thing to think about. And weak architecture means, in some ways, giving in. Giving in to all sorts of things, but not giving in fully, actually getting strength from giving in. So we've got a crappy client, and we've got a shitty budget, and we've got all this mess, and it can't be ideal. We give in to all those things, but through that we gain a strength. Sola Morales talks about sort of weak architecture. So strong architecture that he calls weak, through being weak, through not denying things. I think it's a really profound way to think about things. Gordon Meta Clark, an artist architect that you probably know, who deals with art projects largely, and who's dead. But the thing that's remarkable about this for me is that we talk about simultaneous realms. So we don't talk about things in little boxes. We talk about cuts. We talk about things at the same time, and we talk about real things. So the messiness of things. It's an image of Casa Malaparte by Malaparte, not by Libera, I would say, on Capri, and just the ferociousness of the context. That architecture should have some poetic link to a context. There's an image from my office. It's one of my collaborators, Rebecca Lowen. I'm going to show mainly houses and some cottages, and I'll try and relate them back in some ways to some of the sort of sensibilities of Canada, or some of the sensibilities that I and biases that I present. So this is very first house that I designed. It's 20 years old now, and it's a house that sits in a very old neighborhood, very old for Winnipeg, maybe 1900 houses that are Victorian. They're largely Victorian houses, the whole neighborhood. And it's taken over by hippies, the whole area. It's like this little granola belt. And it's an infill house. So there's a really crappy house that had 15 apartments in it. Very small house, single-room apartments. And it finally got condemned, and then they bulldozed it, and it was an empty land. So I did this project. And it's, I think, maybe a couple things that are interesting about the house. It's for a guy in a wheelchair who lives by himself. So he's in a wheelchair. And so I think maybe from my Winnipeg roots of sort of trying to not be so interested in just myself, but in others, there's this sort of idea of trying to privilege the person that's in the wheelchair. So from the point of view, from his point of view of sitting down, the best views are all from sitting down. The way to get into the house is a ramp, and so there's no stairs. There's no stairs in the house whatsoever. So in order to make that sort of necessity, I dug a moat. So there's a hole. So you have to go in the ramp. Everyone has to go on the ramp. Everyone has to sort of use the things that John, who the house is made for, has to use. This idea of context I talked about, I think that there's many ways that you can approach architecture. One is to deny context, to say that I do my own thing, it doesn't exist. Another thing is to say, I look at context and I sort of affirm it. I say it's there, but how do I not take it straight up? So in this particular house, there's two masses. One's a shed roof this way, one's a shed roof going that way. And this aligns with the verandas of the house. This mass aligns with the main bodies of the other houses. And basically, if you're to shift them on their side, the proportions are very similar. So this proportion is very similar to this proportion, and this is very similar to this proportion. So it tries to be contextual in a way which isn't sort of saying, I'm trying to be the same, I'm trying to understand the thing that's there and then shift it. So infill house, really cheap budget, super cheap budget. I'm the contractor, so I built it. I didn't nail every board, but I nailed lots of them, very many of them. So there's a house in the back. So that one shed form went here, this other shed form goes back, and there's a little contained wall and a little backyard courtyard. So the guy that's in the wheelchair drives a car. So he drives into the garage, and then he comes in a ramp through the house. We'll see the inside of the house. So that back wall is the garage. So basically, he drives in the garage, and then he takes this ramp up and into the house, and is able to pass his groceries through this little pass-through there. And this is just a very small little kitchen. And there's a really tall volume inside. That long shed is just a tall volume. We'll see it. Oh, that's the front door. So just a small little entry. And a very standard door. And I just took my saw and ordered a piece of glass and inserted a piece of glass in as a thin little sliver that becomes a sort of little slice to look in. And on this form, this long shed with the garage, it's just one story. On this shed, there's a second story at the back. And in order to get to that second story and to get to the space below, we made an elevator. So we didn't have any money. And so like Sukinen makes his ship, if Sukinen can make a ship, we can make an elevator. So we made an elevator. And of course, there's all sorts of liability issues. And maybe I would never do it again. If somebody dies, I lose, my insurance is, gone. But so we make this elevator. And the elevator follows this sort of angle of the slope of the roof. So it's 90 degrees to the slope of the roof. And so it goes up at an angle. It's like a little forklift. And just welded steel, very simple sort of little structure, a couple little shivs at the top, cable structure, a little reversing motor in the basement, and we made it. I made it. And so John can get upstairs. So there we see another image of it, and at the top of the elevator is a skylight. And the original drawing actually showed a little glass box, almost like the Schroeder house, like Garrett Riedfeld's Schroeder house, a little lantern on the roof. The idea was the elevator would go up beyond the roof, and then he could open up his glass windows and look around the neighborhood. But it was enough that we built the house. I ended up not doing that in the end, but it's quite nice. And you can go up the elevator to this level here. And you can open the skylight so it opens, so you can actually get ventilation. It's quite nice, and John has a little workout room here, which is quite a nice little spot. What else is there in that picture? I think that's okay. So from the second story, from that little platform we were at, you can actually look down into the bathroom. So the bathroom's open to the living room. There's no ceiling on it. So you hope that people aren't making too much noise, or that the privacy boundaries sort of stretched a bit. And so one section's a simple little bathroom with. This is just from restaurants, like for serving. That we had no money, and so to make a little stainless sink, we just punched the chafing rack and made a nice little sink. And that room that we saw in the previous picture that's at the front is a bedroom, which is very small. It's maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, but it's very tall. It's super tall. And it's only got one little window on the front. So in order to bring daylight in from another direction, there's a little slit that brings west light down that wall and into that front room, and actually works quite lovely. The sun angle's really nice, so you get daylight from a couple directions. And then it's a simple little bathroom, really simple. So there's that tall room, and the light that comes from here just goes above. There's a wall that's above the bathroom, and there's a little shelf up here that you can't get to. But when John's coming up the ramp here, and he's in his wheelchair right here, he gets this really perfect view of a tree, and nobody else gets that. So there's a bunch of situations in the house where I thought about what John might see. And so he gets, somehow we try and make it special for him, right? And sort of make that sort of work. Oh, what are we doing here? Okay, I'll show you another house. Sorry, I'm not trying to brag by showing magazine covers, but this is a house, this is a cottage, not a house. It's for a rich lawyer guy. And it's on the big lake just north of Winnipeg. And it's a house that I think language-wise is quite similar maybe to the last one, but has a bunch of, again, has some color inserts and some unusual sort of windows, unusual window locations. So this is a plan of the main floor. And basically, so you come up this ramp, you come in, there's some millwork that doesn't touch the ceiling. There's bedrooms 1, 2, 3. There's a stair that goes up to another bedroom at the front. There's a stair that goes up to a little platform out here, and the lake is out here. So we're looking at the lake. And it's forming a little courtyard in the front and a semi-courtyard in the back. So we're not able to make Brazilian courtyards or to make inside-outside spaces like Brazil, but the attempt is to try and make some inside-outside spaces. And this just shows where some of these color bars are. And there's a room here which has screens on it because the bugs are just like insane. You walk out and you're just covered with bugs. So, but in that room, there's a wall which folds open, and in the summer you can have the wall open. There's a picture of it. Oh, we'll go back to that picture though. This is looking down that corridor. So there's a window on the floor right here, and there's these bedrooms, which again don't touch the ceiling, and there's sort of glass above. They sort of have walls but not walls, right? It's another drawing of it. Some sketches of, there's the main body of the house. We built a little carport in front, and so you'll see it in a minute. There's some pictures of the carport somewhere. There's just some drawings of some of the spaces, trying to imagine some of the spaces. So this is from that second-story room, looking back at the rest of the house with the courtyard in between. And so I guess if that's the master bedroom, there's a little outdoor deck here that sort of provides a look out to the water, which is really lovely. And the idea here was, and the client never really had the guts to do it, super unfortunate, but there's this history of Aboriginal people that make these fishing walks where you can, and they take them out in the fall when the ice comes, but you extend this long finger out into the water and you fish. And I always tried to talk him into making one of those. So the idea was that you would come out of your bedroom in the morning, you'd run out, and you'd be like way in the middle of the lake, right? You know, and you could dive off of it and swim or whatever, right? Okay, so there's a carport. There's a house. It's sort of a brutal, sort of cold house, but there's some richness. There's this little kiss of lipstick. You know, it's almost like you're being kissed as you walk in with this sort of color. So I talked about the screen room. This is that screen room, and we made some custom furniture. Actually, this is hardly custom furniture. This is deck wood. We did make some custom furniture for this house, though. Oh, here. So we made these sofas and stuff just for economy. And so the inside of the house has a lot of just plywood. It's quite sort of inexpensive house. I mean, even though it's for a rich guy. And yeah. So that was that screen porch. You can see the window wall open. Which for you guys isn't a big deal. You know, when I was at your house, all the walls were open. In Winnipeg, I have to say, it never happens. Okay, so I showed you that hallway with the green. This is the inside of the bedroom. So there's like a little threshold that gets formed, a little cover over the door, built-in cabinet, and then so there's no wall. The wall is cabinet. The wall is millwork. So it just sort of becomes less in some ways. I don't have a bunch of walls. I've got furnitures, built-in furnitures that separate things. Okay, so that's that wall that folds open. And that's a window to a room upstairs. So there's a small little room upstairs. And, yeah. And from that second floor bedroom, there's a little deck. And in the side of the deck, there's a window, a side window. So it forms a little lantern of light in the middle of the house. It's quite nice. It's the entry. It's just a drawing of it with the garage. Okay. This is my own house. This is in a sort of somewhat bourgeois area, I hate to say. but we're sort of on the boundary of the bourgeois area. We're not quite in the bourgeois area. We're sort of removed a little bit. So this is the house location here. This is quite a busy street. Where's Corden? My office is right here. And my office is right here. And this is quite a busy street with cafes and restaurants and stuff. And then there's very, very rich houses here and beyond, but this is sort of rougher. So I'm right on the boundary of it. River is the Assiniboine. It's a large river. And there's a really nice big park there. And we're maybe 5 minutes from downtown, from the center of the city. It's quite close to the center of the city. And so building the house was actually building the house. I couldn't afford to pay somebody, so I actually built the house. I mean, I paid people to come, so that's the hole. And so we dug a hole, and what happened was the guy that did the concrete is a good friend of mine, and he. I should have known this. He can't really read drawings, so he marked the corners out in the wrong location, and so the house ended up being too far forward, and so what ended up happening was there was these old trees that were really fantastic, and they had to get killed because it was marked improperly. This is the house. So it's it's shaped like a C. Or a U, let's say. And on the base of the U, there's one second-story piece. And there's a courtyard in the middle. And the house at the front hovers above the ground. So it sort of feels like it's sort of floating. And this picture is quite nice in terms of how it looks, because from the street, it was an empty lot for maybe 30 years. Somebody tore a house down. They were going to build a bigger project. They couldn't afford it, or they couldn't get the zoning, so they didn't. So the whole front of the yard grew in, and I just left it. It's all like forest. It's all quite rough. And so from the street, you almost don't know there's a house there. You don't see it. It's quite nice that way. Okay, so there's plan. Plan and frame. So this is like living room, entry, outside porch, dining room, stair upstairs, kitchen, outside porch covered over by second floor, bedroom, bathroom, back entry, garage with the separation, and a garden here. And the reason I show this drawing is because the only way I could afford to build the house was to somehow understand how the economy of building in Winnipeg. So the economy of building in Winnipeg is, for houses, is using wood. And wood has a span of 5 meters. So the whole house is 5 meters. And 5 meters is one room. So 1 room width. 5 meters, it's 16 feet, about 5 meters. So that's typical span. Everything's very typical. So no ceilings above 8 feet, standard sheet of sheetrock. Span is 16 feet. Everything's very sort of normal, like really normal. And so initially I was going to build a long bar, but there's front yard setbacks, so I turned the bar in on itself. And the amazing thing about that, sort of like there's plan. Living room, millwork piece, a bunch of millwork pieces that don't touch the ceiling, and a bunch of free spaces. So there's a outdoor deck, covered outdoor deck, garden, walk out from the basement. So from the basement you can actually walk outside, and you're in this really tall slot that's, even though there's no space in the house which are very tall, there's this space with a 3-story house beside you, and you look up at the sky. It's quite nice. So there's some unusual window placements. There's a window on the ground as you come in, so you can tell if the guest that's visiting you was in Milan last week and what kind of shoes they're wearing, or whether they're in Beausejour, and whether they're wearing their boots, or you can see their feet. And when the cars drive by in the on the street, you can look right into the house. It's like a perfect view in. So when my kids were really small, they'd be crawling in the windows, and you could see them. And they thought the windows were for them. But the thing that I think is probably, for me, the most interesting thing about the house, I showed you that Gordon Metacark cut of a building, is I see the house as being a series of layers and framed views. So these images are sort of crappy, but let's see them. Okay, this one's turned on its side. I'm at the back entry and I'm looking at myself. It's down here, so it's back forth. There's a whole bunch of kinds of relations where you can see through layers, and you can see there's frame views that connect to other ones. So there's a whole series of sort of relational kinds of things that get set up, and layers that you can see through. And of course, they're all different as daylight changes. So at nighttime, they're completely different. When the sun's somewhere else, the glass is reflecting, so it's not allowing you to see right through. If the light goes on, all of a sudden you can see right through. It's a whole bunch of, and here's some more too. So there's a whole bunch of different layers. There's a little patio upstairs, small little hole, just a nice, it's almost like a little bed. You start to see how light turns the windows into mirrors, of course, right? And this is a shot of it without the deck finished. So there's a really big cantilever. It's wood, just big though, like 16 by 7 or something, and flush framed, and over the largest window. And a bunch of crap millwork, like super crap millwork that I made that just sort of forms walls, but without having closets and needing very much furniture. So the other side of this is the entry. So this is the back of the closet, which is quite deep, and still have that crappy TV. It's nothing changes. And so in the bathroom on the main floor, there's a floor window, and outside the floor window is a garden. And right where that window is, we always plant lavender, things that smell. So you open the window, and you're in the washroom, and it smells. It smells really nice. And And this is just super crap millwork that I made that's epoxy painted. So it's made into one surface. It's just homogeneous. It's just painted. So I actually quite like the cheap and the feeling of cheap, where there's nothing rich about it, there's nothing posh, but it feels like material. So at night, you know, that window becomes a lantern, it's sandblasted. There's a whole bunch of different sort of ways that you can start to see it. There's the other side of that cabinet. It's a little garden space where you can sit on this little wall with your glass of cachaça and tend to your garden. You know, you can pick a few things and you can hoe it a bit and you can sit out here, and there's boards that run between the house that are like little walkways, so you can sort of meander and garden, right? And the kitchen's like right there, so you just jump out and you pick your things and you make your food, not unlike your house. So this is it at night from, I think I'm on the roof. So there's the sort of courtyard. You can see multiple cuts though. It's about a bunch of cuts that you're trying to see this and this and this at the same time, right? So that shows the cantilever. That's that big beam. So it holds the front roof and it holds that back cantilever, which is a bedroom. And it's a stucco. Oh, and you see hockey on. That's a reflection of the glass I'm shooting on, the TVs over here, right? And at the back door, there's another floor window. So from the living room, you can see when somebody comes in, but they don't see you, right? You can see their feet. You can see them enter. And it's in a rough context. I mean, it's right next to a three-story apartment building, but it's actually quite nice because there are always people walking and stuff, and they're not sort of snooping and stuff. It's quite okay. And it's a hole in the middle of the floor upstairs where you just drop things down. Staircase going up, and there's a skylight above it. Oh, and I won a prize for it, for the Pig-Headed Artist of the Year award, which is no big, from Joop van Lieshout, but it's no big deal, except it came with 7,000 euros, and it came, which is quite a lot of money. It's like Canadian dollars. It's maybe $14,000. It's maybe 50,000 reals. It's like a ton of money, and it came the day that the banker phoned me and said, we were building the project, and the banker said, we can't do this anymore. We're going to shut it down. We have no more money. You have no money. You can't do it. And then this prize came, and it was for this house, and it sort of paid for a bunch of things. It was just perfect timing. So from the front street, looking through that window, there's a Donahue chair. You can see through to the back lane. And the transparency changes as the day goes on, right? It holds, like Alvaro's house, it holds parties nicely too. There's a cinema being projected, and there's sort of assortment of people in the house. Oh, okay, I'll show this house. This is there's a history of making houses in, I guess in Eastern Europe, but also in Canada, from sod. You know, this idea you make something from nothing. You make a house out of the earth. And so this is a sod thatch house. We made a house that is more of a installation for video. This is it unfinished. This is the site plan. This is the model. It's sort of buried in the ground, mostly buried in the ground, with a couple of approaches. And so here's an image of one of the approaches, this big wall of color. and you go to this internal world, which is, it's just another image. There's a plan of the house. So this is an underground wall. Soil comes up. It's like a little pit outside the kitchen. There's a washroom. And really, there's a couple train cars, sort of bedrooms, exterior space, and just open. It's pretty sort of simple project. Layer drawing of the framing, which is quite complex. So we had to, because we ended up making this uneven truss system. So every truss is different, and the guy's making it himself. So and he couldn't understand it. So I ended up having to make a model and sort of talk about the measure and how they changed and how the thing might work. So it's just a rough model that he used on site to build it. Oh, this is another project, a cottage. A cottage in Ontario. We're working on this project, and it's for this friend of mine. And he's got this really this amazing piece of property on Georgian Bay. This really incredible lake and the shield, all this rock and beautiful water. And so we're working on this renovation of this project, and he phones me one day, and it's a really crappy project because there's really not very much you can do, and he's got no money. He phones me one day, he says the house burned down. It was the best day ever because they didn't have anything in the house, really. And they got all this insurance money. They got like $400,000 or some like ridiculous amount of money. And he said, it's bulldozed now. We can start fresh. We can make a new house. So that's what we did. So we made this new house, which is this. So this magnificent lake is here, and this is in snow. The top of it's all rock. It's sitting on rock, and there's a crap digital model of it. But this is a big rock mound, and basically we make single bar, another bar, and then a separated little guest cabin with a deck. And so what there is there's a shortcut where you can actually don't have to go into the upstairs. There's a internal stair down. But you can go down and through the cottage, sort of through the outside of the cottage, like through the courtyard. So siting it was quite difficult because you can't move rock, and So there it is layered. There's the drawings. For some reason, I don't have any finished construction or finished shots of it. That's the upstairs bar that comes out and forms a little screen porch. There's a ramp that goes down and underneath through it. There's an upstairs deck which connects back to the lake there. That's a guest cabin. Yeah, it's quite a nice project. Yeah, there you get to see it better. So there it is from the lake. There's that roof deck, the roof deck. And it's all just using crap windows, but it's good. There we see it. So we see the shortcut and the ramp through, and then down to the lake. And from up above, there's sort of kitchen, dining, living, screen porch, and then the bedrooms are all down below, tucked underneath. We were watching soccer, actually. We were watching World Cup that day, I think. Okay. This is a project that I showed on the same road trip that the bus tour, the rock and roll bus tour that Randy Cohen was on. I was on the same tour. We were sort of drinking buddies on the tour. We just we went from Vancouver to Halifax, and this is the project I talked about, which is my own cottage, and in Manitoba, there's two lakes, two big lakes. There's lots of lakes, but there's two really big lakes that are like oceans. They're sort of like oceans, small oceans, seas. And this is the one which is less populated. And so the other one is where the Icelanders are, where Gimli is and all that stuff. That's where that movie was from. This is the one less populated. There's this one location here. It's called Twin Beaches. And it's basically like a little sand bar. It's like a little sand strip where there's a back lake, Lake Francis, and then the big lake. And this little sand strip is where this cottage is. And this is maybe talks about a process more than the other projects. So there's a sand strip. It's really quite small. I mean, it's really quite narrow at times. And the big lake is a really big lake. It's like ocean. So so we start project with some idea that we're going to make an opening to the beach, and it's all sand beach. So all the cottages there are sort of quite jumbled together, and they're all way back from the beach. We decide we're going to go right at the beach. We're going to be on the beach, and we're going to make a concrete foundation. And we're going to make a little hole that goes through to the beach, and we're going to sort of design some kind of wood frame to go on top of that. And that these are going to be rooms that you can sleep in the sand, in the beach. And so the geometry sort of closed towards a view of the water. And so we start building before we finish designing it. And but we make this model, and as part of the model, I always wanted to drive one of these old Citroens, the ones that go up and down, the DS. And so we have the DS, it's a wagon in the model. And we start to sort of use pictures from the site and try and make this sort of like scenography. We're interested, I guess, the other thing I should say is that we, or our practice, is interested in buildings not being dead. That lots of times people think about projects as this set of pictures of the thing not occupied or not used and not worn and not. We're interested in it being alive. And so one of the reasons to be here is because it's so alive. There's snakes. So these are the snake marks in the sand. And there's all sorts of creatures there. And we start to imagine the whole site's alive. We also imagine that the wood part of the building maybe floats. Like, I mean, we didn't get one of these volanters, but we're imagining that thing could sort of hover, and you'd sort of hover above this concrete structure. So that's a picture of the volanter. And this is a sort of early proposition which has some resemblance of what ended up happening, but not entirely. This is actually not sort of what happened, but somewhat what happened. So this is an image thinking about the snow that comes onto that site comes from 50 kilometers across the lake, and it collects. So all the snow collects there. And the first time I went out to the site, the snow was, taller than this. Like it was that deep. So I guess the imagining here with this little animation, or it's a series of images, is that the snow would cover it. And so we're thinking about the cottage being buried in the winter, like completely buried. And but there's a roof hatch, so you can open up the roof hatch and you can go in through the roof, right? You can come in and you can light the fire inside, and it'll melt the snow, and then you can be okay. So we started thinking about this model, and we started to use it like a movie set, or like a drama set, or like a theater, and try and think about how the site was alive. So we take some dramatic pictures and set up these sites and try and create a mythology around the sites. We write a little screenplay. So in the screenplay, there's a stove, there's a looking glass window, there's a winter door, there's the snakes, there's the toads, there's a room full of furs, there's a Citroen, of course, and it's all this mythologized sort of sense of how this cottage is going to be. There's a kitchen queen made by the Amish. Okay, is this one go on? Yeah. So we start to take, and there's all these stories about the ice tearing apart everyone's cottage and stuff. So we start to make these movies that sort of animate the model. And through that, we start thinking about it more, about how that works, and not being afraid of it. But yeah, so there's the ice. Is that ice again? Oh, there's water. There's water. So we're imagining the crush of the sea, the inland sea, Lake Manitoba, going against the cottage, right? So we take this video of some footage. This is it's a fire, and there's the water, and then it's being projected back there. Somebody's blowing in the water. We're sort of trying to make the thing alive, trying to sort of animate it, and try and imagine how that shifts what we end up doing. So that started to develop the design of it, but we wanted to just get going. So we committed to a foundation. So we made this set of drawings of concrete and these concrete walls. They're quite nice walls. The guy that made them is a good friend, and the only time he could make the walls was in the winter, because all his guys are too busy in the summer. He said all his best guys, he could never send his best guys in the summer because they're always too busy. So he said, let's do it in the winter, and then all my best guys will do it, and he won't have to lay them off. So we did it in January. And so he builds all this formwork, new formwork, really nice. And just before he went to pour the concrete, it snowed. And there's like 12 feet of snow. So they had to dig out all the formwork by hand. It was totally insane. But they did a great job of the formwork. So we'll see. There's a formwork. So there's concrete foundation. And so we end up figuring out what we're going to make above. And there's a train car room, basically a room just with a full bed, another room with a full bed. So you just jump into the room, and one big open space with a big sort of bow truss, and just a kitchen, and the kitchen queen, and a screen porch. And so we start making this. When I say we start making it, my office does. So there's two guys that work in my office that maybe are not so good at drawing. So I send them out there to build. and so it's a really good way to sort of deal with them. And the two guys are really good builders, right? So, and I go out there too. So this is a section. You can see this sort of bow truss. And in the truss, there's a space up above that you can climb into. It's not full height. And there's another space here you can climb into. And underground, through seeing those water videos that we're making, we're thinking, what happens if the water gets really high? What happens if it comes through? What happens, right? So we make this little crank system, and we've got these floors that lift up. So if the water comes in and the sand comes in, the floors can lift up. So we make, like the car, like the Citroen goes up and down. The house can go up and down. So there these are some stills from a movie that we shot there. But there we're framing it. You can start to see it sort of taking some sort of form. There's a car. And there you can see the floors. The floors in a sort of slightly elevated position. You know, this is sort of the highest they could go. And the thing does float in some ways. There are some extreme cantilevers with wood, with metal straps, and, you know, there's a beach there. It's starting to get framed. It's all the brackets for the roof. The roof is they're all individual plates and gussets that we welded, had cut and welded. And there's there's that space above, right? So sleeping space. There it is in the winter. And then spring hits, and the movie came to life. The movie really came to life. The water was the highest it's ever been on the lake in its whole history. And there's a huge storm and a swell, and the waves came through. And this is it from an airplane, but the water came through. The water was at this height. The water came through at that height. It just washed right through. And so they wouldn't let anyone out there. Like, this ugly thing is okay, and some of these things are sort of, you can see all the debris, right? Finally, they let us out there, and they say it's going to be a total disaster, right? And but they didn't realize that there's no roof that joins these two. and that the roof above is sort of a saddled roof, so it's shaped like that. They thought it was all wrecked, but it was actually in perfect shape. It was absolutely perfect. They just didn't understand what it was supposed to look like. So the only issue was that these rooms filled with sand, so we had to dig out the sand. It's okay. So the site is really alive. So that's going there on the road, on some like tractor that's about this high. So yeah, this was across the road. It all got swept away, right? It's like really crazy. So there's the water. There's where it's existing. This one goes, I think. Oh no, doesn't. And that's it. After they, you can see the sand inside and stuff, right? So the water's up to that level. They built this dike to sort of protect it afterwards. Which they're going to build the dike farther out into the lake soon, so it'll be fine. So that's it. They built this dike which goes 4 miles, 4 kilometers. There they're building the dike. And then we start working again. Okay, I'll just keep going here. Oh, here we go. So this is another little, I'll just show you 2 more of these little videos. This is a little projected video on the cottage. It starts to sort of create some kind of other understanding of it. So rather than projecting on the model, we're actually projecting on the cottage. So as a thing's being done. Okay, there we go. There it is. There it is. There it is with glass. So you see the screen's not in here yet, but you see the reflection of the water. So that's the glass window, which is there it is before the glass went in. You can see the wind. And you can see the wind. You can see how strong it is. It's actually deflecting the poly by about 6 inches, something like that. So that glass is actually almost half an inch thick and tempered and weighed 3,000 pounds. So to put that in took 12 people. 12 of us had to lift it in. So there's just before the glass went in, there's a storm that develops on the lake. This is after the tsunami, after the water goes through. Storm develops on the lake. There it's coming. Reclad with the same plywood as the plywood from the forms down below, and then painted multiple times. All the windows are custom. We made them in our office. Myself and Simon. We'll see it in a minute. See the snow piling up. Hole in the floor. We made the sinks in the bathtubs. They're just made out of plywood with kerfs and just using water, hot water, to bend them and pull them down, and then epoxying them. So all the plumbing fixtures, the counters and stuff in the bathtub and stuff are all epoxy, white epoxy. So there's a kitchen as an epoxy piece. There's a bathroom before the sink went in. And the tub, I think, might be the next shot, but it's not shown finished. Oh, there's the tub. The tub actually sits in the floor as a flush tub, so it hangs. There's the tub. So you can slide the door open. There's a screen too, and you can just see at the lake. You can have a bathtub at the lake, basically. So here's us making the windows. This is after going to Paulo's house, Mendes de Rocha's, and seeing his windows that pivot. But the problem with Winnipeg is that we need screens. How do you do the screen thing? Do you make like a hairnet or? So this is a window which has a big arm inside, which can counterweight it. And then we started making them. And making sort of unusual ones. There's a view from up above. So this is before the glass was installed, but there's a window which opens down, window which opens out. Windows do things that you can't buy windows to do in our place. So in this case, and there is a folded screen at the corner here now, so you can open the corner and you have like a panoramic view. It's quite nice. And we made all the doors. So the doors are really big panels that slide open with screens. So that's the bathtub. That's before the bathtub, and there's the sliding door for it. Oh, there's a Métis leg wrestling. My students come out every year and we have a Métis leg wrestling competition. So we leg wrestle. Okay. That's that place. Have we got another 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. Is that okay? Any questions? Or it's okay? It's okay. I'll show you maybe. I'm not going to show you institutional building. I think we made a few nice ones, really nice ones, but I'll show you more cottages, I think. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. Because they're more about context of Winnipeg and surrounds and stuff, right? View slideshow. Okay, here we go. So this is again, I say every project has no money. Every project just about has no money for us, but this one has no money at all. This is just a little drawing. It's in a really strange place, which is on Lake Winnipeg, the other big lake, but way up. It's like 3 hours away from Winnipeg. You have to drive down gravel road forever, and when you get there, it's like swamp with mosquitoes. I tried to talk them out of not buying it. They bought it. And then their friends bought next door. We're doing their cottage now. Anyways, so this is for a lesbian couple. There they are. She teaches history, Jarvis, and Rowan teaches engendered studies or something, both at university. They're pretty cool. That big lake, usually we see it down here. It's way the hell up here. It's right there. An hour on the gravel road. The lot cost nothing. There it is. It's this thick bush. There's the water. And there's our drawings. We ended up making this little courtyard that you go through. It's like got a hole in it. It's got a lookout. In this model, it doesn't show the lookout. But there's a little sort of back protected deck. It's not sited as well as it could be. It's sited parallel to the shore of the lake, but the sun didn't quite work. The client made me do it, and I should have said no. Okay, there's that. You see the geometry. So basically there's a screen porch, little artist studio, it's a little deck, little walkway. So this is there's a building above this. Bathroom, living, kitchen, dining. Yeah, screen porch. It's a little hole through. It's quite a nice little plan. There's a second floor. So you go up, this is a tall volume. There's like a little loft space and then a bedroom. And then you go up and there's a lookout. And let's see the lookout. Oh, there's drawings. See the elevations. We'll get to the thing itself in a minute. So there's 3D model. You see the little lookout, which we'll see better in real. So there's shots of it when it's finished. There it is. There you understand it. And so some of these walls are translucent panel, just as like twin wall or like a Lexan panel to let light through. There we go. There you see the Lexan panel. The thing I didn't say about it was I always talk about site and how you should know site and you should know poetry of site and you should know functionality of site, and I completely ignored the site. You know, I thought, it's just ground, right? You just set the thing on the ground, it's okay. And so I didn't even put my shovel into the ground to see what the soil was. And when I did put my shovel into the ground, the thing was already designed and drawn. I put my shovel in the ground and there's water. Like 1 foot down, there's water. The water table's really, really high. And I make this cottage, which is like really elongated. So the freezing, it would just be like a snake. Just be horrible. So I had to sort of think fast. And so what I ended up doing was so there's a guy on site digging trenches. So what I did was I dug these trenches down to the bedrock, filled them with really big rock, and made rock walls. So there's these rock walls that enable the frost not to get through to then change the level. Perfect. It worked. Perfect. Oh, that's Alvar Aalto's summer house. As I never thought of it when I was designing it, but afterwards I thought that somehow that was in my head, you know? So there it is. That's a under construction shot, still all the garbage is here. But the thing's entirely shingled, so it's all just cheap, shitty green shingles, side roof, everything. There it is. There you can see the little crow's nest lookout. And the screen porch is covered over for the winter. Yeah. Which one? Oh, it's roofing. It's shitty like roofing, asphalt roofing. Like the cheapest material ever.
Like a
shingle. It's a shingle, just stapled to the side wall. Plywood underneath. Building paper and plywood underneath. Hey, there's just two more projects, and I'll show them very quickly. They're one's built, one's not. One's going to be built right now. They're actually building it today, and it's right next door to this one. And it's for another lesbian couple. We have like this whole lesbian corner, you know, we have a whole community. It's great. So this is a super rough sketch that's meant to be pole house on poles. And it's, again, there's a site. And so the house sits on these pipe poles that sit on the bedrock, that get drilled into the bedrock. And we've had a ton of trouble with them. There's a section of it. So the bedrock's right here. This is all crap. This is all crap. This is boulders, actually, so it's really tough. And so we have a driller out there right now drilling these into the bedrock. And these thin little pipes will go up and support wooden platforms. And basically the cottage has a slight split in it. So it's one void, one open space, one normal space plus higher space, and then two spaces above that with a deck. It's, so the ground floor on grade, you see right through, it's just a deck. The first floor you come up, there's just kitchen, open space, aircraft door. I'll show you in the elevation. You come up, there's a living space which is tall, and then 2 bedrooms that just have beds in them. They're just like full beds, bathroom. You go up, bedroom, deck. So you're quite high. And the authority having jurisdiction spent 4 months approving it. Usually you give them a sketch and they approve it in an hour, but they saw all the drawings and they got really worried and they said, wow, it's really serious. And they wanted every page stamped and they wanted to see calculations on the structure and it's just like absolutely insane. There it is. It looks very, very plain, but I think it's quite nice structure. Inside is just wood curtain wall, so it's wood studs that are balloon frame. They're continuous, and so there's ventilated space on the outside, and then just rigid insulation. There's a pipe. There's a hole. So we have to actually hold the thing down. So we have to sort of fill this with rock and hold it down so it doesn't sort of fall over because there's strong winds, right? So structurally it seems like really simple, but it's actually really not that simple. One last project very quickly. This is again a cottage. It's a quite nice site. It's a really strange piece of farmland that's along the river. And usually if there's river site, you usually get that or something. You don't get the whole face of your site along the river. So this is where there is an existing house. My client, a friend of mine, I'm in record club with him. He bought it for almost nothing. And we proposed to make a little building that goes over the river. And so this is crappy, but this is the river. And so we're hoping that we can actually stretch over the river so you can look down both ways in the river. And so, shittier green color here. I didn't have control over it. But the deck actually does hang over the river. And so that's a stair to get to outside deck. And then this is a space with a mezzanine. It's a very simple cottage. It's quite nice. There's a mezzanine from inside. It's still under construction, just sort of finishing. There's a mezzanine, kitchen below. We'll see a section in a minute. Oh, there's plan. So there's the river. There's the way in. There's outdoor pizza oven right here on a little concrete slab. It's concrete slab on grade with steel piles. And then washroom, kitchen, and then this has mezzanine above it. This is open, stair up, and then their bedroom in the back end. Really simple plan, but I think quite okay. So there's the second floor. And that's really how far it sticks over the river. So there's just a really long cantilever that just sort of enables this deck. And from the deck you can actually see down the river. That's it. So there's a bunch of projects. Thanks.